They are already dead. They just don't know it yet. The enemy commander whispered those words into his radio, then leaned back and lit a cigarette. 4 days. He had waited 4 days for this moment. 7 of his best men, hidden across every ridge, every shadow, every narrow path of that valley, each one positioned with surgical patience. The trap was perfect. 12 Americans were 3 minutes from walking straight into it. No warning, no escape, no chance. He exhaled slowly and smiled. Because in his mind, this was already over. If this is your first time here, subscribe right now, drop a comment with your city, and follow this story all the way to the end. Let's see how far this goes. The valley had a name on the military maps, but the men and women who operated in eastern Afghanistan rarely called it by its official designation. They called it something else, something quieter, something that carried weight the way only words spoken by people who had been afraid can carry weight. They called it the corridor, and for good reason. It was long, it was narrow, and on every side the mountains rose like walls built by something that did not want human beings inside. The ridgelines were jagged and uneven, full of folds and shadows and natural positions that a trained eye, a professional eye, would immediately recognize as gifts. Gifts for anyone who wanted to watch without being seen. Gifts for anyone who understood that the best ambush is the one that looks like an invitation. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter understood all of this. She understood it the way you understand something that has lived inside you for so long. It stops feeling like knowledge and starts feeling like instinct, like breathing, like the way your hand reaches for a railing on stairs without your brain telling it to. Emily had been a Marine Scout sniper for 11 years, and for 3 days, she had been lying completely still in the rocks above the eastern approach to the corridor, watching, just watching. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Reynolds, lay 6 feet to her left, his own eyes pressed to his observation scope, his voice a barely there murmur that came out of the side of his mouth, like a man who had learned long ago that sound carries farther than you think in mountain terrain. Movement northern ridge, same position as yesterday. Emily did not move her head. She already knew, she had already logged it. 3rd time in 18 hours, she said. Same window, same angle. Sniper. Sniper, she confirmed. That had been the moment 36 hours before everything came apart, when Emily first understood that what she was looking at was not a defensive position. It was not a patrol. It was not a casual presence. It was a construction. Someone had built something here. Someone patient. Someone experienced. Someone who understood the same things Emily understood, but from the other side of the scope. She had started over. Gone back to the beginning. Looked at the valley not as a landscape but as a problem. Looked at it the way her old instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Walker, had taught her during her first year of sniper school when she was young and fast, and convinced that speed was the answer to everything. Slow down, Walker had told her once, sitting beside her on a firing range in the Carolina heat, watching her miss a target she should have hit. You're not looking at the target. You're looking for the target. There's a difference. One is hunting. The other's just hoping. She had not understood him that day. She understood him now. So she slowed down. She looked at the valley not for threats, but as a threat. She asked herself the question that Walker had drilled into every student who ever sat across from it. If I wanted to destroy everyone who came through here, where would I be? And then she asked it again and again and again. The answer came slowly, the way truth usually comes, not all at once, but in pieces, each piece connecting to the next, until the picture was so clear and so terrible that she almost did not want to say it out loud, because saying it out loud would make it real. Jake, she said quietly. Yeah. Tell me how many positions you've logged. A pause. She could hear him counting in his head. 6 confirmed. Possible 7th on the southwestern face, but the angle's bad and I haven't been able to. It's there, Emily said. Look 14 meters east of the boulder with the crack running through the middle. There's a shadow that shouldn't be there. Silence. 3 full seconds of silence, Emily. Jake's voice had changed. She knew that voice. It was the voice he used when something went from serious to critical. That's 7, she agreed. 7 snipers. Yes. Positioned to cover every approach, every exit, every piece of open ground between the entrance and the compound. She paused. Jake, this isn't an ambush. This is an execution chamber. Whoever built this didn't want a firefight. They wanted a score. Another silence, longer this time. We need to call it in, Jake said. I already called it in, and Emily did not answer right away. The wind moved across the rocks above them. Somewhere far below, a bird that had no business being in that altitude circled once and disappeared. Command wants confirmation, she said finally. They want hard proof. They want us to wait. Yes. Jake exhaled through his nose. She heard it even over the wind. That small, controlled breath that meant he was thinking through something that made him angry, and he was choosing not to let the anger run ahead of the thinking. How much time do we have, he asked. The SEAL element is 22 minutes out. Maybe 20 if they push the pace. 22 minutes to convince command to halt an authorized extraction mission based on our field assessment. That's accurate, Emily. His voice dropped lower. You know what happens if we're wrong. Yes. You know what happens to your career. To mine, yes, Jake, I know. And you're sure? It was not a question. Not really. It was the thing people say when they already know the answer and they're giving the other person one last chance to take the easier road. Emily had been in this valley for 72 hours. She had slept 4 hours total. In short intervals, the way snipers learn to sleep not deeply, but efficiently, with one part of the mind always listening. She had eaten from her pack without sitting up. She had not spoken above a whisper. She had cataloged every movement, every shadow, every angle of light, across every position she had identified. She had done this once before, in Helmand Province, 6 years ago. A different valley, a different team, a different situation that was somehow the same situation. And she had waited then. She had followed protocol. She had trusted the process. 3 men died while she waited for confirmation. She had lived with that for 6 years. She was not going to live with it again. Jake was quiet. Okay, what do you need me to do? The radio crackled. It was their forward command contact, a signals officer named Lieutenant Morales, who had been managing their communication relay for the entire operation. His voice was professional and flat. The way military voices get when they're delivering information they know the recipient won't want to hear. Bravo element, this is command. We've received your field assessment and are currently reviewing. You are ordered to maintain observation posture and hold until further instruction. Do not, I say again, do not engage without direct authorization. Acknowledge. Emily pressed the transmit button. Command Bravo element acknowledges a beat. Please advise what is the current status of the extraction element. They are approaching the objective area. A pause on the other end. A pause that lasted just long enough to tell Emily everything she needed to know about what command was actually thinking about. Bravo element extraction element is proceeding on schedule. Your concerns have been logged and are being evaluated. Maintain position. She released the transmit button. Jake said nothing. She said nothing. They both understood what had just happened. Command did not believe them. Or worse, Command believed them but was unwilling to halt an authorized mission on the word of 2 field operators without additional verification that there was simply no time to provide. Emily looked through her scope at the valley below. At the 7 positions she had identified over 3 days of patient, exhausting observation. At the trap that was waiting, fully loaded, fully patient, for 12 human beings who were 20 minutes away, she thought about Thomas Walker. About the thing he used to say on the last day of every training cycle, when the students were tired and full of themselves and ready to believe they had learned everything there was to learn. Technology can fail, Walker used to say. Equipment can break. Intelligence can be wrong. Orders can be confused. And radios can go silent at the worst possible moment. But skill, real skill, the kind that lives in your hands and your eyes and your judgment that stays inside you. When everything else fails, that's what you have left. The question is whether you trust it. Emily had asked him once, sitting in his office at the end of her first year, what happened when trusting your skill meant going against what you'd been told to do? Walker had looked at her for a long time. Then he said, that's the question, isn't it? That's the one they can't teach you in a classroom. They can teach you to shoot. They can teach you to move. But that question, that one you have to answer for yourself. And when the time comes, you'll know. She had not understood him then either. She understood him now. 15 minutes. The SEAL element was 15 minutes out, and Emily's mind was not calm, it was controlled, which is different. Calm is the absence of pressure. Controlled is what happens when you acknowledge the pressure and choose what to do with it. She was working through the geometry of what she was looking at. 7 positions, 7 trained shooters, each one placed to support the others, to eliminate blind spots, to create a network of fire that had no gaps. It was elegant, in the horrible way that some terrible things are elegant. Whoever had designed this was not an amateur. This was the work of someone who had studied the same manuals she had studied, who had learned the same lessons from perhaps the same kind of instructor, and who had then gone out and applied those lessons with precision and patience. She respected it the way a surgeon might respect a particularly complicated knot. Not because it was good, but because it was exact. and she was thinking about how to come apart. Talk to me about sequence, Jake said, reading her mind the way he had learned to do over 4 years of working together. Priority goes to the hidden position first, Emily said. The one nobody would find if they weren't looking for it specifically. That's the one that kills the most people because nobody sees it coming. Southwest face. Southwest face, 14 meters east of the cracked boulder. He's been in that position for at least 48 hours. Probably longer. He hasn't moved because he doesn't need to. His angle covers the center approach from a direction that every other position points away from. He's the anchor of the whole system. Take him first. Take him first. Then the eastern ridge. That position controls the exit. If anyone tries to pull back, he has the clearest shot. He has to go second before anyone on that team thinks about retreating. Jake was writing in his small waterproof notepad, the way he always did when Emily was sequencing. Not because he would forget, but because writing it helped both of them lock it in, made it real and ordered. Third, he asked, western approach. He's the most exposed position of the 7, which means he's probably the most confident. Confidence creates predictability. He'll be watching the approach, not watching for me. And the center crossfire positions, 4 through 6 go in sequence once the anchors are down. By that point, if I've been fast enough, they'll know something is wrong, but they won't know what or where. That uncertainty buys me maybe 30 seconds. And the 7th. Emily paused. The 7th position was the elevated one, the one that sat highest above the valley floor, with a sight line that swept across the entire corridor like a lighthouse sweeping a harbor. It was the command position, the one that could see everything, the one that the shooter in that position used to watch not just the valley but his own team, to observe, to direct, to adjust. The 7th shooter was the one who would understand fastest that something was going wrong. And when he understood, he would stop looking down into the valley and he would start looking for her. The 7th is last because he's the most dangerous by the time we get to him, Emily said. But he's also the one who controls the others. If I miss the sequence, if I'm too slow, or if they communicate fast enough, he's the one who organizes the response. He's the one who finds me. Jake looked up from his notepad. So we can't be slow. No, we absolutely cannot be slow. Jake sat back slightly. She heard the small sound of him shifting his weight. Emily, yeah, I need you to understand something. His voice was careful. The voice he used when he was saying something he needed her to actually hear, not just process. If this works, and I believe it works, I trust your read completely. But if this works, command is going to ask why we didn't wait. They're going to ask why you opened fire on 7 enemy positions without direct authorization. And the answer, I was right, isn't going to be enough for some of them. I know that, your career, Jake, she said it quietly but firmly. 12 people are 12 minutes away from walking into something that was built specifically to kill all of them. I know what this costs me. I'm making the choice anyway. A long silence. Then Jake Reynolds, the man who had been her spotter for 4 years, who had been in more difficult situations with her than either of them could comfortably count, who had seen her at her worst and her best, and all the complicated spaces in between, said simply, "Okay, tell me what you need." "I need you to get the SEAL commander on the radio," Emily said. "Not through command, direct. Use the emergency coordination frequency. They'll monitor that." "Yes, they will. And I need you to tell him in exactly these words: Bravo element has eyes on 7 confirmed enemy sniper positions in your approach corridor. Do not advance." I say again, do not advance. "We are taking action." Jake's pen paused over his notepad. "We are taking action," he repeated. Say it exactly like that. That phrase is going to trigger a response from command. I know. The moment I say it, everyone is going to know what we're doing before we do it. "Good," Emily said. "Then nobody can claim they didn't know." Jake looked at her, then really looked. The way people look when they're trying to decide whether someone they trust has crossed the line between brave and reckless. And she felt his eyes on her profile, and she understood what he was weighing. But she also understood something else. Something that Walker had never explicitly said, but that she had absorbed over years of listening to him talk about the difference between following orders and following responsibility. There are moments when the rules exist to serve the mission, and there are moments when following the rules destroys the mission. The hard part, the part that cannot be taught in a classroom, that cannot be written in a manual, is knowing which moment you're in. Emily Carter knew which moment she was in. She had known for 36 hours. "Make the call, Jake," she said, and Jake Reynolds picked up the radio. The SEAL element commander was a man named Lieutenant Commander Harris. 11 years in the teams, 2 combat deployments, 1 training deployment to partner forces in the Middle East, 1 classified operation that was not on his official record. He was not a man who panicked. He was not a man who frightened easily. But the voice that came through his emergency radio, direct, unscheduled, unauthorized by any procedure he was currently operating under, was precise enough and certain enough that something in his chest that he had learned to trust over 11 years of difficult situations told him to stop walking. So he raised a fist. The element behind him stopped. 12 men, full kit, midway through the final approach to the objective, silent as the mountain itself. Harris pressed the radio to his ear. "Say that again, Bravo element," he said quietly. Jake Reynolds said it again, word for word. Harris looked at his point man, then at his sergeant, then at the valley ahead of him, the long, narrow, inviting valley that his mission brief had described as a low-threat approach corridor with manageable terrain. The brief had been wrong. He could not yet see the positions Emily had identified, not from where he stood, not without 3 days of patient observation and the specific knowledge of exactly where to look. But the voice in his radio was not the voice of someone guessing. "Acknowledged," Harris said, and "Bravo. What is your timeline?" Jake looked at Emily. Emily was already settling into position, already breathing, already beginning the sequence of small adjustments that transformed a human body from something animated and restless into something more like furniture. Something fixed. Something that would not move until the work was done. "We're already working," Jake said into the radio. Harris heard that, and he held his position. Emily's first breath was complete. She had done this enough times that the ritual was not something she thought about. It was just something she did, the way your lungs breathe without your asking them to. The small inventory of every point of contact between her body and the ground. The weight of the rifle. The familiar geometry of the stock against her shoulder. The sight picture, clean and precise, crosshairs settling over the position she had identified 2 days ago on the southwest face. The shadow that shouldn't be there. The absence of something that told the whole story. She adjusted for distance, 1,140 meters. She adjusted for wind 4 miles an hour, left to right, consistent. She adjusted for elevation, for the temperature differential between her position and the target position, for the angle of the shot. She did not rush. She was not calm. She was controlled. And then she thought just for 1 second, just a flash of something, beneath all the calculation, about 12 people standing 200 meters behind her in the mountain air, waiting, not knowing, trusting that someone, somewhere, was looking out for them. She thought about 3 men in Helmand Province 6 years ago. She exhaled slowly. Halfway through the exhale, in the natural pause that occurs between breathing out and breathing in, the moment when the body is most still, when there is no movement at all, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle spoke. Down the valley, 14 meters east of the boulder, with the crack running through the middle, the shadow that should not have been there stopped moving. Emily was already adjusting to the next position before the sound had finished echoing off the mountains. "1," Jake said quietly. The valley was still. For 3 seconds, nothing changed. And then, because she had been fast, because the distance was extreme, because the sound had scattered and confused the remaining 6 snipers, still did not know. 3 seconds was all she needed. She was already breathing for position 2. It was the Eastern Ridge shooter who heard something first. Not the shot was too far, too scattered by the terrain, but something else. Some professional instinct that lives in the back of the mind of anyone who has spent years in the field. A kind of animal alertness that cannot be fully explained, but is absolutely real. He shifted, not much. Just the small rotation of a man turning to look at something he hasn't consciously identified yet. Emily saw it. She was already at 2. She fired, Jake said. Now the valley began to change. Not dramatically. Not the way movies show it, with explosions and shouting and obvious chaos. The change was subtle, almost invisible. But Emily had been watching this valley for 3 days, and she could read subtlety the way other people read newsprint. The Western approach shooter had not moved, but his body language had changed. He was alert now. Something had touched the edge of his awareness, the way a sound in a dark room wakes you before you know what the sound was. She had maybe 2 seconds before he started looking. She fired. 3, Jake said. And now the valley knew something was wrong. She could feel it. Not hear it, not see it exactly, but feel it the way weather changes, the way a room shifts when someone has heard news they haven't shared yet. The remaining 4 positions would be communicating now, whispered words through radios. Short, tight, professional exchanges. Something is happening. We've lost contact. Do you see anything? No. What was that sound? No, stay in position. She fired. 4, 5 fired. 6. Jake's voice was different now. Not panicked. Jake Reynolds did not panic. But the control in his voice had a different quality, The control of someone who is holding something very carefully and is very aware of how fragile it is. He's moving, Jake said. Emily already knew. The seventh shooter, the elevated position, the one with the sightline across the entire valley, was not staying still anymore. He was the professional she had identified him as. He had processed what was happening faster than his colleagues, which was why he was in the command position in the first place. And he had done exactly what Emily had predicted he would do when he understood. He had stopped looking at the valley. He was looking for her. Wind is picking up, Jake said. Left to right, estimate 7 to 8 miles an hour. Variable. I know. Distance is 1,300 meters. Maybe 1,350 from this position if he's shifted northeast. I know. A pause. He's good. Look at how he's moving. He's not exposing himself. I know, she said for the third time. She knew because she had watched him for 3 days. She knew how he moved. She knew how he thought. She knew, and this was the most important thing, she knew that he was doing exactly what she would do in his position, which meant she also knew what he was going to do next. He was going to find the angle. He was going to narrow down her position from the direction of the previous shots. He was going to be patient and disciplined and professional because that was who he was. And he was going to be fast because he had already lost 6 teammates. And he knew that whoever was doing this was running out of time too, was exposed now in a way they hadn't been before. And that the next few minutes were going to determine who went home. Emily breathed. The wind shifted 2 miles an hour to the left. She adjusted. The seventh sniper stopped moving. He had found an angle. He was settling in, which meant she understood this with the cold clarity that comes from years and years of practice. He was about to fire. Jake, she said quietly, you're not going to miss. If I miss, she said again, tell Harris to pull his team back. Don't let them advance. Tell them to Emily, you're not going to miss. She looked through the scope. She could see him now. Not fully, he was too good for that, but she could see enough. The edge of something. A position defined by its relationship to the terrain around it. The geometry of a person trying very hard not to be a geometry. Distance, 1,330 meters. Wind, variable. Currently 7, trending back to 4. Elevation difference. The shot was going uphill at approximately 12 degrees. She was not calm. She was not panicking. She was controlled. She breathed out, halfway through the exhale, the moment between. She squeezed the trigger. Down the valley, the 7th position went still. And for a moment, just a moment, the valley was absolutely, completely, perfectly quiet. Then Jake's voice, low and steady, 7. Harris's voice came through the radio 1 second later. Bravo element, this is SEAL Actual. Did you just... The corridor is clear, Jake said. 7 positions neutralized. You are clear to advance. I say again, you are clear to advance. A pause, acknowledged. Harris's voice had something in it that Emily recognized but could not quite name. Something between professional restraint and something that went much deeper than professional restraint. Advancing now, Emily kept her eyes on the valley. She was already scanning. Because something was wrong. She did not know yet what it was. It was that thing again, the animal alertness, the professional instinct that fires before the conscious mind has caught up. The trap was broken. The 7 snipers were gone. But something in the terrain was not adding up. Something was missing from her map. And she had learned the hard way, 6 years ago, in Helmand, that missing pieces were the most dangerous things in the world. She kept scanning. Jake was reporting to command now, his voice calm and measured, walking through the sequence of what had happened with the flat precision of a man who understood that what he was saying was going to matter in ways that would unfold over months and years. Emily kept scanning. The SEAL element was moving into the compound. 12 men, moving well, moving fast, professional in every detail of their movement. Emily kept scanning, and then she saw it, not a position she had identified, not one of the 7, something else. Something that had been there the whole time, waiting, patient, outside the edges of the web she had already unraveled. A position she had never considered because it was not part of the trap. It was pointed at her. Jake, she started. The shot came before she finished his name. Jake Reynolds made a sound that Emily Carter would hear for the rest of her life. Not a scream, not a dramatic sound at all. Just a short, involuntary exhale, the sound a person makes when something has happened to their body before their mind has processed what it is. Emily did not turn. She could not turn. Training and instinct locked her in place for the critical half-second. It took her brain to process the following information in sequence. Jake is hit. Jake is alive. That sound was not a death sound. Jake cannot provide full spotter support. The shooter who fired is still active. You are now the target. Everything had changed. And everything was beginning again. The sound Jake made lasted less than 1 second, but Emily Carter would carry it for the rest of her life. It was not the sound of a man dying. She knew that sound. She had been close enough to it in other places, in other years, that she could identify it the way a doctor identifies a specific type of cough. This was not that. This was the sound of a man whose body had been interrupted sharply, violently, without warning, and whose mind had not yet caught up to what his body already knew. Jake, she did not turn. Her eyes stayed on the valley. Talk to me, a breath controlled, forced into shape by will alone. Left shoulder, Jake said. His voice was tight. Not broken, but tight the way a voice gets when a person is spending a significant portion of their available mental energy on managing pain, and they only have so much left over for words. Through and through, I think. I can move. Don't move yet. And do not move yet. Her voice was quiet and absolute. The voice she used when there was no room for negotiation, because there was literally no time. You move before I locate him and he adjusts his angle, and the next shot is not through and through. You hear me? A pause. She could hear Jake breathing, counting his breaths the way she had taught him years ago, the way Walker had taught her before. That the rhythm that keeps the mind organized when the body is screaming for it to do something, anything, immediately. I hear you, Jake said. Good. Stay still. Talk to me while I work. She was already moving her eye across the terrain, not panicking, not rushing in a way that made her sloppy, but moving with the accelerated precision of someone who understood exactly how much time she did not have. The counter snipper, because that was what he was. She understood it now with absolute clarity, had fired from outside the 7-position web she had already dismantled. That told her 3 things simultaneously, 3 pieces of information that arrived in her mind at the same moment the way connected truths sometimes do. First, the enemy had anticipated that someone might find the 7-position trap. They had built in a failsafe, a hunter for the hunter. Second, the counter snipper had been in position before she started engaging. He had been watching her the entire time, which meant he had her general location identified before he fired. Third, the fact that Jake was hit instead of her was not an accident of poor marksmanship. It was a choice, a professional choice. The counter snipper had deliberately hit the spotter first, because eliminating the spotter was how you isolated the shooter. He's professional, Emily said, not because Jake needed to hear it, but because saying it out loud helped her organize the response. He hit you first on purpose. He's trying to isolate me. Doing a pretty good job of it, Jake said, and despite everything, despite the pain she could hear underneath every word, there was something almost dry in his delivery. The specific dark humor of military people in difficult situations. The humor that is not really humor, but is actually just a way of saying, I am still here. Can you access the radio? Emily asked, slowly. Get Harris. Tell him there's an 8th shooter. Tell him the element needs to pause at the compound entrance until Emily, they're already inside. She stopped, processed that. The SEAL element had already entered the compound. They were inside, which meant Harris was operating on the assumption that the threat was neutralized, which meant if this counter-snipper decided to shift his angle from hunting her to hunting the men now moving through the compound below. Get Harris right now, she said. Tell him to halt internal movement and maintain cover position. Don't explain, just tell him to stop moving. She heard Jake reaching for the radio, heard the small sounds of a man doing something that was making his wounded shoulder protest with every millimeter of movement. Heard him not make a sound about it. She kept scanning. The counter-snipper had fired from somewhere along the northern edge of the valley. She had determined that from the sound, not the shot itself, which had been suppressed, but the secondary sounds. The way sound moves around terrain, bounces off rock faces, arrives at the ear in a sequence that a trained listener can read like text on a page. Northern edge. Elevated. But not the highest point. The highest point was too obvious. He was disciplined enough to avoid the obvious. Harris is holding, Jake reported. His voice was a degree tighter now. The pain was organizing itself into something more insistent. He wants to know the situation. Tell him the situation is that I'm working on it. He's not going to love that answer. Tell him anyway. She heard Jake relay the message. Heard the static pause of Harris processing it on the other end. Then Harris's voice, clipped and precise, acknowledged. Holding. Bravo, you have 90 seconds before I make my own assessment. 90 seconds. Emily did not argue with the timeline. Harris was not being unreasonable. He had 12 men in an unsecured compound with an unknown threat, and 90 seconds was already generous. She would have said 60. She scanned the northern edge. She was not looking for a person. A person who knew what he was doing would not be visible. She was looking for what a person left behind the negative space, the displacement, the subtle wrongness that existed in any position, no matter how carefully a shooter had prepared it. She had identified the hidden seventh sniper by a shadow that shouldn't have been there. She needed to find what was wrong about the northern edge. 60 seconds remaining, approximately, she said. Talk to me. Keep your voice steady. Keep your words coming. I need the ambient input while I scan. It was something she had discovered years ago, that having a voice in the background, a human voice with a pattern she trusted, helped her visual processing in a specific way she could not fully explain but had tested enough times to know was real. Walker had called it cognitive anchoring. Jake just called it keeping her company. Okay, Jake said. His voice was measured, deliberate. The voice of a man spending energy he needed for managing pain on the specific task of keeping his partner grounded. I'm thinking about that training exercise in Nevada. The one where you were convinced there was a shooter on the East Ridge, and Walker kept telling you there wasn't one and you were so certain. There was one, Emily said. There was one, Jake agreed. Walker admitted it 3 weeks later. Said you were the only student who ever identified that position in all the years he'd run that exercise. He told me identifying it was less impressive than what I did after, Emily said, still scanning. Her eye moved across the northern edge with the systematic patience of someone who had done this so many times that the process had become almost meditative. He said the impressive part was that I identified it and then waited. I didn't react. I kept the problem open instead of solving it too fast. Why are you telling me that right now? Because I'm telling myself, Emily said, because I want to react right now and I can't. I have to keep the problem open. Harris is going to move in about 40 seconds, Jake said. Emily, I know, Jake. She kept scanning. And then she saw it. Not a shadow this time, something else. Something smaller. Something that required the specific combination of 3 days of intimate familiarity with this terrain and a particular angle of light that had changed in the last 4 minutes as the sun shifted a fraction of a degree across the sky. A rock that had moved. Not dramatically, not obviously, by perhaps 2 inches. But she had stared at that particular cluster of rocks on the northern edge for so many hours over the past 3 days that its geometry was as familiar to her as the face of someone she loved, and 2 inches was enough. 2 inches was a story. 2 inches told her that something behind those rocks had shifted its weight, adjusting for a new angle, tracking a new target. Not her. The compound. Jake, tell Harris to move his people away from the northern windows. Right now. She heard Jake moving the radio. Heard him transmitting. Did not wait to hear the response. She was already computing the shot. Northern edge, elevated behind the rock cluster she had been studying for 3 days, without knowing why she kept coming back to it. Distance, 1,100 meters. When the wind had shifted again, 3 minutes ago, now moving south to north at approximately 5 miles per hour. The elevation change was the complicated part. The counter snipper was above her, which meant the physics of the shot were different from everything she had taken in the last hour. She adjusted, she breathed, and then she thought, for just a moment, because she could not stop even when she needed to, about what happened if she was wrong. What happened if those rocks had moved for a different reason? An animal, a vibration in the ground, something completely unrelated to the threat she had identified. What happened if she fired at an empty position while the real counter-sniper was somewhere else entirely, and the muzzle flash of her shot gave him the exact location he had been waiting for? What happened then? She acknowledged the thought. She set it aside. Because the alternative, doing nothing, waiting for more confirmation, trusting the process, she had tried that once. She had been 26 years old, and she had believed in the process with the complete faith of someone who had not yet paid the price of that belief. She was not 26 anymore. She fired. The shot traveled 1,100 meters across a valley in eastern Afghanistan in the specific silence that exists between the moment a trigger is squeezed and the moment the world understands what has happened. And the rocks on the northern edge went completely, absolutely still. Harris, Emily's voice was steady. It was always steady after. That was the strange thing. Before was controlled. During was focused. And after was always eerily steady, as if the completion of the act released something that had been held under tremendous pressure. Northern edge is clear. You are secure. A pause. Confirmed, Harris said. Jake exhaled, long and slow and from somewhere deep in his chest. That's 8, he said. That's 8. Emily agreed. She finally turned to look at him. What she saw made her chest tighten in a way she had not allowed herself to feel while there was still work to do. Jake Reynolds was pale, not the pale of someone who was afraid, but the specific, particular pale of someone who has lost a meaningful amount of blood and whose body is quietly informing them that the situation requires attention. His left hand was pressed against his left shoulder, and the fabric underneath it was dark. How manageable, he said. Then, because he knew her well enough to know that manageable was not a number, he added, through and through like I thought. Clipped the top of the shoulder. Muscle damage. Nothing structural. I'll need a surgeon to confirm the nothing structural part, but that's my read. Your read is usually accurate. My read is always accurate, he said. And there was that dry quality again. That specific humor that she had come to understand over 4 years was Jake Reynolds' way of communicating that he was still present, still himself, still thinking. Help me get this packed, and I can still run the radio. She moved to him, opened the medical kit that she had maintained with the same discipline she maintained everything else. She had done field dressings under worse conditions, once in almost complete darkness, once while actively taking fire, once on herself when Jake was the one who couldn't do it. This was difficult but manageable. This is going to hurt, she said. It already hurts, Jake said. It's going to hurt more. Emily packed the wound. She packed the wound. Jake made one sound, very short, very controlled, and then was silent. His breathing changed in a way that told her the pain had spiked sharply, and he was managing it through the rhythm, the same rhythm she had taught him, that Walker had taught her, that went back through years in training and the accumulated wisdom of people who had understood that the body could survive more than thought it could if the mind knew how to hold it together. Keep breathing, she said. I am breathing, I know. I'm saying it anyway. She worked quickly. The dressing went on tight. She secured it. She checked the color of his face against what she knew about blood loss and shock and the specific territory between manageable and not manageable. He was pale. He was hurting. He was in the manageable territory. For now, we need to get you out, she said. We need to complete the debrief first. Jake, Emily. His voice had the quality it got when he was making a decision that was not negotiable. Harris is going to need a full account of what happened in this valley before he leaves this compound. Command is going to need a communication. And you are going to need someone to say what they saw, clearly and completely, on the record, before anyone from the senior chain starts forming a different version of events. She looked at him. He looked back at her. You know I'm right, he said. She did know he was right, and she hated that she knew it, because knowing it meant accepting the delay, and every minute that Jake sat on this mountainside with a packed wound that needed a real surgeon was a minute that made her insides feel like something was pulling them in the wrong direction. 20 minutes, she said. Then we're moving you whether the debrief is done or not. 30, 20, 25, 20, she said again, in the voice that meant the negotiation was over. Jake almost smiled. The SEAL commander is going to want to talk to you, he said. Harris specifically. Not through me. He's going to want to hear your voice. I know. He doesn't know you. He doesn't know your record, your read, how you work. To him right now, you are the person who fired 8 shots without authorization, and one of those shots was within 40 meters of his element's entry point into the compound. The counter-sniper was targeting his people. He knows that. He's going to know it even more clearly in 20 minutes, when his intelligence team reviews the position. But right now, he's running on adrenaline and operational tempo, and he needs to hear you say it, not read it in a report. Emily pressed the transmit button. SEAL Actual, this is Bravo Element. Do you copy static? Then, copy Bravo Element. Go ahead. Requesting direct communication with Element Commander. Over. A pause. 2 seconds. 3. Then Harris's voice, and it was not the clipped operational voice she had been hearing through the relay for the past hour. It was slightly different. Still controlled, but with a quality underneath the control that told her he was processing something. This is Harris, you're the sniper. It was not a question. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter, Marine Scout Sniper, attached to the forward observation element. Yes, sir. Another pause. Longer. Staff Sergeant, I'm going to ask you a direct question and I need a direct answer. Before you engaged those 8 positions, was there any moment when you were not certain? Any moment when the assessment might have been wrong? Emily thought about the answer, not because she didn't know it, but because he deserved the honest version, not the clean version. No moment of uncertainty about the position, she said. 48 hours of observation on the 7th position, 72 hours on the others. The counter-snipper was a variable I had identified as a probability, but not a confirmed position. That's the honest answer to your question. A probability. Yes, sir. I knew someone like me would anticipate someone like me. It's how this works. The gap in my assessment was a specific location of the counter position, not the existence of it. A longer pause. She heard something in the background of Harris's transmission voices, movement, the sound of men doing work. Your spotter, what's his status? Wounded. Through and through, left shoulder. Non-critical. Manageable. He needs extraction within the next 2 hours for proper treatment. We can facilitate that, Staff Sergeant. Harris's voice shifted again. She was beginning to learn the register changes in it, the way some people communicate entire paragraphs through the tone of 3 words. You saved my team. She said nothing. I want to be precise about that. Not approximately, not arguably. You saved my team. All 12 of them. The 7-position setup in that valley was designed to produce 0 survivors. I've seen layouts like that before, and I know what they do to elements moving through them without warning. 0 survivors. My team. Yes, sir. Command is going to have a different perspective on how you achieve that outcome. I know. I want you to know that my report is going to be precise about what I observed and what the outcome was. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Harris said, and there was something in that not unkindness, but a specific honesty that she respected. The conversation with command is going to be difficult. You know that. I've been expecting it since hour 2 of the observation period. A brief pause, then something she had not expected. Harris laughed. It was short and it was not happy exactly, but it was real. The laugh of a man who recognized something in someone else that he understood very well from the inside. Hour 2, he said. How long were you out there total? 72 hours. He let that sit for a moment. All right, Staff Sergeant. Get your spotter ready for evacuation. We'll have a bird available in 40 minutes. Can he hold 40 minutes? Emily looked at Jake. Jake raised his right hand and gave a slow, steady thumbs up. He can hold 40 minutes, Emily said. Good. Harris out. The radio went quiet. Jake let out a long breath that he had apparently been holding for some portion of the conversation. He sounds like the kind of officer who means what he says, Jake offered. He does. It helps with him, Emily said. Command is a different situation. Jake looked at her steadily. We should talk about that. We should. Not the official part. I know you know the official part. I mean the other part. He paused, organizing his words with the care of a man who understood that how something was said mattered as much as what was said. Emily, what you did today, taking 8 shots over an extended engagement without stopping, in the sequenced way you did it, people are going to study that. Some of those people are going to be studying it to learn from it. And some of them are going to be studying it to build a case. I know. The case they're going to build is going to center on the authorization question. You knew you didn't have it, and you proceeded. The counter-argument is the outcome. 12 lives saved. Mission completed. No friendly casualties except my shoulder, which is going to give me a great story for the next 15 years. He paused. But outcomes don't always win the argument. You know that. I know that, Emily agreed. She sat back against the rock. The physical exhaustion of the last 72 hours had not hit her. Yet it was still somewhere behind the adrenaline, waiting, but she could feel its edges. The way you can feel weather coming before it arrives. She thought about Walker, about the conversation in his office, about the question he had never directly answered. What do you do when trusting your skill means going against what you've been told? She had answered that question today. Now she was going to live with the answer. Walker used to say something, Emily said. At the end of training, at the end of every cycle, he used to say that the real test of a sniper wasn't the shot. The shot was just mechanics. Mechanics could be taught to anyone with the patience to learn them. The real test was every single decision that led up to the shot, the hours of observation, the reading of the situation, the choice about when and whether and how. He said the shot was just the last 5%. He was right, Jake said. He was right. And the 5% is what everyone's going to see. The investigation is going to look at the 5% and ask whether I had the authority to take it. And the 95%? Emily looked out at the valley below. The valley that had been silent for several minutes now. The valley that 12 men were currently moving through safely, completing a mission that would result in intelligence that she had been briefed on this, at a level that she was not supposed to think about too hard, potentially prevent an action that would have cost many more than 12 lives. The valley that had been designed to be a killing field. The 95% is what nobody in the investigation room is ever going to fully understand, she said. Because you can't understand it from a chair. You understand it from a rock in the mountains for 72 hours with the wind blowing in your face. Jake said nothing for a moment. Then write it down. Tonight before the debrief, before the official statements, before anyone has a chance to ask you questions that shape the way you remember it. Write down exactly what you saw and exactly when you saw it and exactly what you knew at each moment and why. Every decision in sequence. Don't edit it. Don't make it clean. Make it true. She looked at him. That's good advice, she said. I have occasional moments, Jake said. You should write that down too. She did almost smile then. Almost, she checked her watch. The 40 minutes until the evacuation bird. 38 remaining. The SEAL intelligence team is going to want to sweep the 8 positions, she said, moving back into operational mode because operational mode was where she was most comfortable and most useful. They're going to find equipment, documentation, communication gear. The counter-snipper position in particular, the team needs to understand that position was preset before we arrived. That's critical. It establishes that the enemy anticipated an interdiction force. That's intelligence that changes the picture of what they knew and when they knew it. Agreed, Jake said. Harris will have his people on it. He seems thorough, he is, and his team is going to find something else. Jake looked at her. What? The original ambush plan, the 7-position setup, it was too good, too carefully integrated, too patient. That kind of planning takes weeks, not days, which means whoever gave the order to set it up knew about the extraction mission before the mission was authorized. She paused. There's an intelligence problem somewhere upstream. That valley was prepared specifically for an operation that was supposed to be classified. The silence between them had a different quality now. Jake processed it. She watched him work through the implications, saw them register on his face, one by one, the color coming back slightly as his brain began doing the work it was trained to do. That's a very large problem, he said finally. Yes. That's a problem that goes well above our pay grade. Yes, Emily. His voice was careful now, very careful. If you're right about that, and you usually are, then the investigation into your authorization question becomes part of a much larger and much more serious picture. People with rank and resources are going to be very motivated to keep that picture from coming into focus. She met his eyes. I know, she said. That's why you're going to write your account tonight too. Jake stared at her. Both of us, she continued, independent accounts. What we saw, when we saw it, the preparation time estimated for those positions, the counter-sniper setup and what it implies. Everything. Written tonight before anyone tells us what the story is supposed to be. You think someone is going to try to control the story. I think 7 professional snipers and 1 counter-sniper were waiting in a valley for a classified extraction mission. I think that means someone who knew about the mission told someone who shouldn't have known. I think the people involved in that chain of events have a very strong interest in making sure the narrative that emerges from today is about an unauthorized shooting incident involving 2 overeager field operators. The quiet between them was heavy with the weight of what she had just laid out. Jake breathed slowly, managing pain, managing thought, managing the specific gravity of understanding that the mission they had just survived was not the whole mission. It was just the beginning of a different kind. Okay, he said finally. The same word he had used earlier, in the same tone, the tone of a man making a commitment he intended to keep. Both of us. Tonight. Tonight, she confirmed. She checked her watch again. 34 minutes. She picked up her rifle. She checked the mechanism with the automatic, habitual care of someone who maintained her equipment the way other people maintained breathing. She scanned the valley one more time. Clear, still. The kind of still that meant the work in the compound was proceeding without incident. 12 people were going to go home because of what had happened in this valley today. 12 people who did not know her name, who would never know her name, who would go back to their bases and their forward operating positions, and eventually, someday, their homes, and they would carry the memory of a difficult mission in Afghanistan that had almost gone terribly wrong and somehow hadn't. They would not know why it hadn't. They would not know about the 72 hours on the mountainside, about the shadow 14 meters from a cracked boulder, about the 7 positions mapped with patient precision over 3 days of wind and cold and almost no sleep, about the decision that had cost Emily Carter the straightforward version of her career before the investigation had even started. They would not know, and that was fine. That was, Emily had come to understand somewhere in the last 72 hours without entirely registering when, the nature of this work. The nature of operating in the space between the seen and the unseen. The people you protected did not see the protection. By definition, if you did your job correctly, they only saw the road ahead of them, not the fire you had already walked through to clear it. She settled back into position and kept her eye on the valley. 32 minutes. She would hold until the bird came. She would hold until Jake was safe. After that, whatever came next, she would handle next. But down in the valley below her, 12 members of a Navy SEAL element, were completing their mission in a valley that had been designed to kill every single one of them. And they were all still breathing. That was everything. That was enough. That was going to have to be enough. Because somewhere across a mountain range and a time zone and several layers of military bureaucracy, a conversation was already beginning. People with rank insignia on their collars were already reading the first fragmentary reports of what had happened in the corridor, already beginning to form opinions, already starting to ask questions in the particular way that questions get asked when the person asking them already knows what answer they want. Emily Carter knew that conversation was coming. She had known it was coming from the moment she squeezed the trigger on the first shot. She had made her choice anyway, and she would make it again, every time, without hesitation, without apology. Because behind those 12 men moving through the compound below was the only argument that had ever mattered to her. They were alive. The evacuation helicopter arrived 39 minutes later. 1 minute early, Emily noticed that. Harris had told his people 40 minutes, and they had made it 39. That told her something about the kind of organization. Harris ran the kind where 40 minutes meant 40 minutes or less, never 41. The kind where precision was not a preference, but a standard that had been established and maintained through repetition and expectation until it simply became the way things were done. She appreciated that kind of organization. Right now, she appreciated it because it meant Jake was being loaded onto a stretcher 60 seconds ahead of schedule, which meant 60 seconds less of him sitting against a rock on a mountainside with a packed wound that needed a real operating room. Jake did not want the stretcher. He said this clearly and without ambiguity to the 2 SEAL medics who came up the slope for him, telling them that he could walk, and that he had walked down worse terrain in worse condition, and that if they tried to put him on a flat surface and carry him, he was going to have feelings about it. One of the medics, young, professional, with the expression of someone who had heard this exact speech many times from many different people, looked at Jake's left shoulder and then looked at Jake and said, "Sir, with respect, you are getting on the stretcher." Jake got on the stretcher. Emily walked beside him down the slope, carrying both their packs, and Jake talked the entire way down, which she recognized as his way of managing the indignity of being carried, by telling himself and everyone nearby that he was still fully functional and in command of the situation. "The written accounts need to be done before the official debrief," he said, picking up the thread of their earlier conversation as if they had never stopped. "The debrief is going to be facilitated by someone from command. Whoever that person is, they're going to have a framework for the conversation already in place. We need to have our version of events fully formed before we walk into that room." "Agreed," Emily said. "And the intelligence questioned the leak, the preparation timeline that needs to go somewhere above the debrief level. That cannot be part of a tactical after-action report. That needs to go to counterintelligence directly. I know who to contact." Jake turned his head to look at her, which clearly caused him pain, which he did not acknowledge. "You already have a contact in counterintelligence." "I have a person I trust," Emily said carefully. "Someone who was Walker's student before I was. Someone who operates in a different lane entirely, and who will understand what the preparation timeline implies without me having to draw them a picture." Jake considered this for several seconds. "Walker's network," he said. Walker spent 23 years building relationships with people he trusted. Not people who owed him, not people he had leverage over. People he trusted, which is a different thing entirely. She adjusted the weight of both packs on her shoulders. "He told me once that the most valuable thing a person in this business could have was not skill, and not intelligence, and not rank. It was someone who would tell them the truth when everyone else was telling them what they wanted to hear. And your contact will tell you the truth." "My contact will tell me what they know," Emily said. "Which is the same thing." The slope flattened as they reached the landing zone. The helicopter was there, rotors still turning, the specific organized chaos of a military extraction in progress surrounding it. Harris was standing 20 meters from the bird, not in the chaos but adjacent to it, watching the whole thing the way a conductor watches an orchestra, not controlling every individual musician, but tracking the overall shape of the performance and ready to intervene if the shape went wrong. He turned when he saw Emily coming. Harris was older than she had expected. Not old late 30s, maybe pushing 40, but older than the voice on the radio had suggested. He had the specific physical quality of someone who had spent a significant portion of their adult life carrying heavy things over difficult terrain, not a bodybuilder's mass, but the dense, functional build of someone whose strength had been developed by necessity rather than intention. His eyes moved the way field operators' eyes move, taking in multiple points simultaneously without appearing to look at any of them directly. He looked at Emily for a moment. Then he looked at Jake on the stretcher. Then back at Emily. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he said. "Commander Harris." He extended his hand. She shook it. The handshake lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and not 1 second longer, which was the handshake of a person who understood that the gesture was communication and not ceremony. "Your spotter is going to be fine," Harris said. "My surgeon is confident. Through and through, no structural damage to the joint. 6 to 8 weeks recovery, full function after." Emily felt something release in her chest, something she had been holding very tightly for the past 39 minutes. "Thank you for confirming that," she said. "I wanted you to hear it directly." Harris glanced at the helicopter, where Jake was now being secured for transport, still talking to the medic with the energy of a man who was absolutely not going to let a gunshot wound slow down his commentary on the situation. "He talks a lot." "Yes," Emily said. "Is he always like that?" "He's like that when he's managing pain and when he's happy and when he's focused on a problem and when he's bored." And Emily said, "So essentially always." Harris looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "How long have you two been working together?" 4 years. "That's a long time in this business." "He's good at his job," Emily said simply. "That makes everything else manageable." Harris nodded. Then his expression shifted, not dramatically, but with the specific quality of a person who has been holding a professional conversation and has now decided it is time to have a different kind. "Staff Sergeant, I'm going to tell you something that I would normally wait for a formal debrief to communicate. But I don't think you should go into the next 24 hours without knowing it." Emily waited. "My intelligence team did a preliminary sweep of all 8 positions in the last 30 minutes. Every position was professionally established, well supplied, and had been occupied for a minimum of 72 hours. The counter-snipper position on the northern edge was prepared independently from the other 7 different supply cache, different communication equipment, different tactical purpose." He paused. The counter-snipper was not part of the Valley Defense. He was an addition, a specific addition, deployed after the original 7-position setup was already complete. Emily processed that. "Someone added him," she said. "Someone added him after the Valley was set up, which means someone knew the Valley was set up and also knew that a capable interdiction force might be sent to deal with it." Harris met her eyes directly. "Someone told them, we might send someone like you." The weight of what he was saying settled over Emily like something physical. She had known it, in the way that she knew things before she fully understood them, the animal instinct, the professional pattern recognition. She had told Jake she had been right. But hearing it confirmed, hearing it spoken plainly by a SEAL commander who had just swept 8 positions and was telling her what his intelligence team found, made it real in a way that her own analysis had not quite achieved. Someone had warned the enemy that an interdiction force was possible. Someone with enough knowledge of operational planning to know not just about the extraction mission, but about the likely response to discovering that the extraction mission was walking into a trap. "How many people knew about the interdiction tasking?" she asked. "That is the question that is going to be of a significant investigation," Harris said. "And that investigation is going to be run by people who are not you and not me. What I can tell you is that the number is small, very small, but not zero." "But not zero," he agreed. They stood in silence for a moment. The helicopter rotors created a steady, encompassing sound that made the silence between them feel somehow more private, more contained. "The investigation into my authorization issue," Emily said, "is going to run concurrently with a counterintelligence investigation," Harris said. "Yes, and I want to be honest with you about what that means practically. Some people are going to use the authorization question as a way to create noise around your credibility. If your credibility is questioned, your observations about the preparation timeline become more complicated to use. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "You're telling me I'm going to become a problem for someone," Emily said. "I'm telling you that the most important thing you can do in the next 24 hours is document everything with a specificity and a completeness that makes it impossible to dismiss or reframe." He looked at her steadily. "Everything you observed, every decision point, every communication with command, times exact word sequence. Don't summarize, don't clean it up. Write it the way it happened." "Jake told me the same thing," Emily said. "Jake is smart." "Jake is very smart," Emily agreed. "He's also on a helicopter right now, and the 2 of us agreed to complete independent written accounts before the official debrief." Harris gave a slow nod. "Then you're already ahead of where you need to be." He glanced at the helicopter again. It was nearly ready. The organized chaos had resolved itself into the organized precision of final preparation. There's one more thing. His voice had shifted again. Not into a different register exactly, but into a space that was more personal than anything he had said before. Less commander, more person. My element lead, he said. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb. He's been on the teams for 9 years. 2 combat deployments before this one. He's the man on my team I would trust with anything, and I mean that without qualification. Emily waited. Webb told me something after the sweep, Harris continued. He said that when he got my order to hold at the compound entrance, when he heard your voice on the radio telling me to halt internal movement, he was in the middle of crossing from the main entrance to the northern corridor. His back was to the northern windows. If he had taken 3 more steps in the direction he was moving, he would have been directly in the counter-snipper's line of fire. Emily said nothing. Harris said, "That's not an abstraction. That's a real measurement." I asked him to walk it out afterward. 3 steps. She still said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that. There was no response that didn't feel insufficient. "I'm telling you this," Harris said, "because in the next 24 hours, and probably in the days and weeks after that, there are going to be people who talk about what you did in terms of protocol and authorization and procedure. And those conversations are going to be real, and they're going to matter, and some of them are going to be genuinely difficult." He paused. "I want you to have a number in your head when those conversations get hard." 3 steps. Emily felt something move in her throat that she was not going to let become anything visible or audible. She looked at Harris. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. The helicopter was ready. "I'll be at the forward base by tonight," Harris said. "The formal debrief is scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. I've already put in a request for a 48-hour delay on the authorization investigation, citing ongoing intelligence assessment. It was approved." He looked at her. "That gives you 48 hours to get your documentation in order and to contact whoever you need to contact." "Don't waste it." "I won't," Emily said. She watched the helicopter lift off. She watched it until it was a sound rather than a shape, and then until it was nothing at all. Then she sat down on the ground in the exact spot where she was standing, put her arms on her knees, and let herself be still for exactly 4 minutes. She had counted. Not for any operational reason, just because 4 minutes was what she could afford. And she had learned a long time ago that giving herself something small and finite this much, and then back to work, was how she moved through the days that were too heavy to move through any other way. 4 minutes. Then she stood up, picked up both packs, and went to find a place to write. The forward operating base was not large, and not comfortable, and not built for anything except the specific purpose of supporting the kind of work that happened in the mountains around it. Emily had been staged there for the beginning of the observation mission 6 days earlier, and she knew it the way you know any place you've used as a foundation, not fondly, but reliably. She found a corner of the operations building where the ambient noise was consistent enough to be ignored: generators, radio traffic, the steady operational background of a functioning military position, and she sat down with a waterproof notepad and a pen, and she started at the beginning. She wrote for 3 hours without stopping. Not because she had been told to, not because anyone was watching, not because it would help her case in the investigation, though it would. She wrote because the act of writing it down, of converting the 72 hours in the valley into a sequence of words that existed outside her own mind, was the thing she needed to do. It was the thing that made it real in the final and complete way that living through something never quite achieves. She wrote about the first day, the first position she identified, the specific quality of the light that had helped her see the shadow on the southwest face on the morning of the second day. Then when she understood she was looking at a system and not a collection of individual positions. The conversation with Jake when they reached 7, and they both understood what 7 meant. She wrote about calling it in, about the words command had used, about the feeling, not fear exactly, but the specific pressure of knowing something critical that you cannot make anyone else understand fast enough, that had built in her chest through the 18 hours between her first report and the moment the SEAL element appeared on her timeline. She wrote about the choice. She wrote it plainly, without decoration, without justification. She wrote it the way it had felt from the inside, which was not heroic and not complicated and not particularly dramatic. It had felt like the only available option, like the difference between 2 doors and one of them was locked. She had not chosen to engage without authorization because she believed herself above the rules. She had chosen to engage because 12 people were about to die, and she was the only person in position to prevent it. And the process for requesting permission was going to take longer than the 12 people had. That was it. That was the whole thing. She wrote it down exactly like that. It took her 6 paragraphs to do it cleanly. She was on the 4th page when her radio crackled. It was Lieutenant Morales, the signals officer who had relayed command's order to maintain position and hold for authorization. His voice sounded different now, not the flat professional voice she had been receiving for 3 days. Tighter, more careful. Bravo element, this is command relay. Staff Sergeant Carter, please confirm your current location. Forward operating base. Operations building, she said. Completing mission documentation. A pause. Staff Sergeant, you're being requested to report to the Command Communications Center for a preliminary conversation with Colonel Marsh at 1400 hours. Emily checked her watch. It was 12:47. She had 73 minutes. Colonel Marsh was not the officer she had been expecting. She had expected someone from her immediate chain, a major, possibly a lieutenant colonel. Colonel Marsh was 3 steps above that. Marsh ran the Regional Special Operations Coordination Cell and had authority over every mission that touched the kind of assets Emily's observation unit represented. The fact that Marsh was making time for a preliminary conversation, not a formal investigation, not a debrief, but a conversation 6 hours after the events in the valley was information. She was not sure yet what kind of information. Acknowledged, she told Morales. I'll be there. She wrote for 53 more minutes. She completed the account. She read it back once, quickly, not to edit, but to confirm that it said what she had intended it to say. Then she signed it with her name, rank, and the current date and time. She folded it and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket. Then she thought about Walker. About the counterintelligence contact she had mentioned to Jake. She had approximately 15 minutes before she needed to start moving toward the communications center. She pulled out the secondary radio, the one she used for communications, that were not routed through the official relay, and she composed a message. It was short, 9 words. The valley was prepared. Timeline does not fit. Call me. She sent it. Then she put the radio away and went to meet Colonel Marsh. Colonel Marsh was a tall man with the kind of stillness that powerful people sometimes have, not the stillness of someone who is relaxed, but the stillness of someone who has learned that unnecessary movement communicates unnecessary information. He was seated at the head of a table in the communication center with 2 other people Emily did not recognize, both in civilian clothes, both with the particular quality of attention that told her they were not civilian. She was 11 minutes early. Marsh looked at the time when she walked in, and she saw something register in his expression, the very small recalibration that happens when someone arrives earlier than expected, and you have to decide what that means about them. Staff Sergeant Carter, Marsh said. Colonel Marsh. She sat where he indicated across the table and put nothing on the table in front of her because she had nothing she was prepared to share in this room yet. This is not a formal proceeding, Marsh said. I want to be clear about that. This is a preliminary conversation to help me understand what happened in the valley today. You are not required to have legal representation present at this stage, though you have that right, and I'll remind you of it. I understand, Emily said. Good. Marsh laced his fingers on the table. Staff Sergeant, walk me through your decision to engage without authorization. No preamble, no warm-up. Straight to the center of the thing. She respected that, even in a room where she was not sure whose side Marsh was on. She walked him through it. The observation timeline, the 7 positions, the 22-minute window, the command order to hold, the calculations she had made and why. She was precise. She was complete. She did not editorialize. When she finished, Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then one of the civilians, the one on the left, with gray at his temples and eyes that were doing significantly more active work than the rest of his face, said, Staff Sergeant, what made you confident the positions were active rather than established and abandoned? It was a good question. It was a technical question, asked with enough specificity that it told her the person asking it knew something about sniper observation. She answered it with the same precision she had used for everything else. The movement patterns, the supply evidence, the communication timing she had inferred from the intervals of minor position adjustment that each shooter had made over the 72 hours. The civilian nodded slowly. And the counter-snipper position. When did you first consider the possibility? Hour 40 of the observation, Emily said. I identified the 7-position network and recognized that it was too complete. There were no obvious gaps. When a defensive setup has no obvious gaps, a professional response is to assume the gap is hidden, not absent. So you anticipated him. I anticipated that he was probable. I could not confirm his location until after I had engaged the 7 primary positions, and he revealed himself by firing. He fired at your spotter. Yes. Deliberately? Yes. Professional counter-snipper protocol. Isolate the shooter by eliminating the spotter's support capacity. It's in the manual. She looked at the civilian directly. Which manual you're familiar with, I think. The civilian's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. Marsh looked at her with an expression she could not read. Staff Sergeant, he said, I'm going to ask you a direct question and I need your honest assessment, not your official assessment. Those are the same thing for me, sir. Marsh held her eyes for a moment. Then how long had those positions been established? Your best estimate. She had been waiting for this question. She had known it was coming the moment. Harris had told her about the intelligence team's sweep. She had known it was coming since hour 30 of the observation period when she had looked at the supply evidence in this position. She could partially see and made the calculation that a specific number of hours could not account for the level of establishment she was observing. A minimum of 96 hours, she said. More likely 120. The Eastern Ridge position showed supply evidence consistent with 5 to 6 days of continuous occupation. Silence in the room. The civilian on the left had stopped nodding. The civilian on the right, who had not spoken yet, was now very still, in a way that was different from the stillness of someone who was listening, and the same as the stillness of someone who has just received the answer they needed to a question they could not ask directly. Marsh exhaled through his nose, very controlled, very deliberate. The extraction mission was authorized 72 hours ago, he said. Emily did not respond. She let the implication exist in the room without her putting words around it. Marsh looked at the civilians. Something passed between the three of them in the look of communication that was too fast and too internal for Emily to read fully, but whose outline she could see clearly enough. The civilian on the right said very quietly, "Who knew about the valley as the approach route?" Marsh said, "That is a question for a different room." "Then this needs to move to that room quickly," the civilian on the right said. "Because if the positions were established 5 days ago and authorization was granted 3 days ago." "I understand the timeline," Marsh said, a silence. Emily sat in it and did not move and did not speak. She was not in this conversation anymore. She had been in it, and now she was sitting at the edge of a different conversation that was happening in front of her. A conversation between people with more rank and more authority and more institutional weight than she had. A conversation whose outcome was going to determine a great many things about what happened next. She was the person who had started this, the observation, the decision, the 8 shots, the account she had written, and the contact she had sent 9 words to. She had started it. But the people in this room were the ones who were going to have to finish it. Marsh finally looked back at her. His expression had shifted in a way she could not fully characterize, except to say that something had been resolved in it. Some internal calculation completed. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he said, "the preliminary conversation is concluded. You are dismissed to the forward base, pending the formal debrief, scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. You are not to discuss the contents of this conversation with anyone except through your legal representative." "Understood," Emily said. She stood. She picked up nothing from the table because she had put nothing on the table. She walked to the door. "Staff Sergeant," she turned. Marsh was looking at her with the expression of a man who had something to say that did not fit inside any of the official categories of things he was permitted to say. "The 48-hour hold on the authorization investigation," he said. "I confirmed it personally. You'll have the time you need." She looked at him. "Yes, sir," she said. She walked out. The afternoon light was flat and bright and cold. She walked back toward the operations building. Her secondary radio had a notification, a return message from the contact she had sent 9 words to. She read it, 6 words. "Already looking, don't say anything else." She put the radio away. She thought about Walker, about the training cycle lessons and the office conversation and the question he had never directly answered, about what he would say if he were here right now, in this particular moment, in this specific situation that had begun as a tactical problem and had become something considerably larger and more complicated and more dangerous. She thought she knew what he would say. He would say, "You did the first part right. Now do the second part right." The first part was the easy part. She had always thought that was an exaggeration. She did not think that anymore. Back at the operations building, she found a communications terminal and sent a message to the military hospital where Jake had been taken. Not through official channels, through the terminal's secondary network, which was permitted for welfare communications. The message was brief, account complete. Situation developing in a direction we discussed. Rest. I'll update you at 0700. Don't let them give you anything for pain that makes you foggy. I need your brain clear tomorrow. His response came back in 4 minutes. Already refused the good stuff. Shoulder is enormous and currently winning arguments with my entire nervous system, but my brain is clear. Whatever's developing, we handle it together. Get some sleep, Emily. 4 hours minimum. That's an order from someone who outranks you in stubbornness. She looked at the message for a moment. Then she wrote back, 3 hours. You don't outrank me in anything. She did not go to sleep for another 90 minutes. She spent that time doing something Walker had taught her in her second year, during a training block that was officially about situational assessment, but which she had always understood was really about something different, about learning how to hold large, complicated, threatening situations in your mind without letting them become overwhelming. Not by making them smaller than they were. Not by pretending they were manageable when they weren't, but by breaking them into the pieces that were within your reach and committing to those pieces with everything you had and trusting that the pieces outside your reach would eventually come within reach of someone. She made a list, not on paper in her head, the way she did everything important. The pieces within her reach, the pieces outside it, the timeline, the contacts, the documentation she had completed, the conversation with Marsh, and what it meant about where this was going. The list was long, but it was finite, and Emily Carter had always worked better with finite problems. Give her something with edges, and she would find every edge and map it exactly. Give her something boundless, and she would make it bounded. That was the skill underneath all her other skills, not the shooting, not the observation, not even the judgment that had defined the last 72 hours. It was the ability to look at something enormous and complicated and frightening and say, I can see where this ends. She did not yet know how it ended, but she could see where it ended. That was enough to work with. That was in fact everything. She set a mental alarm for 3 hours and closed her eyes. Somewhere across the mountain range, in a military hospital with better equipment than this forward base would ever see, Jake Reynolds was lying in a bed with a recently repaired shoulder and a clear head and a certainty she knew this as clearly as she knew anything, that tomorrow was going to be complicated and difficult and that they were going to navigate it the same way they had navigated the valley. Together, one position at a time, one decision at a time, with the same patience, the same precision, and the same absolute refusal to accept that the situation was impossible just because it was hard. The generators ran steadily in the background. The radio traffic continued. The mountain wind moved across everything, indifferent to all of it. Emily Carter slept. She woke up 3 hours later exactly. Not from an alarm, not from a sound. From the specific internal mechanism that had been reliable in her for so long, stopped thinking as remarkable and had started thinking of it simply as the way she worked. Her brain kept time, even when the rest of her was unconscious, and when the time was up, it returned her to full awareness, with the same precision she brought to everything else. 0347, she lay still for 4 seconds. Not because she needed the time to orient, she knew exactly where she was, exactly what day it was, exactly what was waiting for her in the next 12 hours. She lay still because 4 seconds was the interval Walker had taught her, the gap between waking and moving that allowed the body and the mind to arrive at the same moment before either one made a decision. Then she sat up. The operations building was not quiet, it was never quiet. Forward operating bases had a constant low-frequency hum of activity that paused for no one's sleep schedule, but the quality of the noise had changed. The daytime operational intensity had settled into the nighttime maintenance frequency. Fewer voices, more mechanical sounds, the generators still running, the radio still cycling, but the human component reduced to the people whose watch this was. Emily washed her face with water from her canteen. She ate something from her pack, not because she was hungry, but because her body had run on almost nothing for 3 days, and it needed input whether it was asking for it or not. She drank a full liter of water. Then she sat down and thought about 0800. The formal debrief was 6 hours and 13 minutes away. She thought about what she knew going into it. She thought about what Marsh had told her and what the civilians in the room had not said, but had communicated clearly enough. She thought about the 6-word message on her secondary radio, already looking. Don't say anything else, and about what already looking meant in terms of timeline, and what the person who had sent it had likely already found in the hours since she sent her 9 words. She thought about the authorization question, which was the official center of the debrief, and about the intelligence question, which was the actual center of everything, but which existed in a different room and would be handled by different people and would take considerably longer to resolve. The authorization question was the battle she had to fight tomorrow. It was not the battle she was most worried about. She was most worried about the thing Marsh had said before she left his room. Not the statement, the timing of it. The fact that he had stopped her at the door. The fact that he had confirmed the 48-hour hold personally. People at Marsh's level did not personally confirm procedural holds as a courtesy. They did it because the hold mattered to them specifically, because the outcome of the next 48 hours was connected to something they were managing. Marsh was managing something. She did not know yet what side of it she was on. At 0430, she sent the update message to Jake. She kept it short, situation developing. Debrief at 0800. I'll brief you fully afterward. Keep your head clear. He responded within 2 minutes, which told her he had not been sleeping either. Already up, thinking about the preparation timeline. Emily, if the positions were established 5 days before authorization, that means someone had specific information about the valley as the approach corridor before the mission was planned, which means either the valley was a standard approach and someone anticipated the mission type, or the mission details were compromised before they were finalized. She read it twice. He was right. And the second option was considerably worse than the first. She wrote back, hold that analysis. Don't put it in any message. Say it to me in person. Understood. Be careful in that room today. I'm always careful, Emily. A pause, long enough that she could feel the weight of what he was choosing to say. You're careful in the field. Rooms are different. The threats don't announce themselves the same way. She sat with that for a moment. I know, she wrote back. Walker used to say, I know what Walker used to say. Then listen to him, Jake wrote. And Emily, the account you wrote. Keep a copy somewhere that isn't on base. She had already thought of this. She had already made 2 handwritten copies, one in her jacket pocket, one she had folded small and placed inside the lining of her pack at a seam she had carefully separated and then pressed back together. The kind of thing you learn to do not from training, but from the accumulated wisdom of people who had been in situations where the things they wrote down mattered and where having only one copy had been a problem. Already done, she wrote. Good. Another pause. 6 to 8 weeks recovery, the surgeon says. I want you to know that when I get back, we're going back to Nevada. I want to see that position Walker showed you in the training exercise. The one he denied for 3 weeks. She almost smiled. He'd have liked today, she said. He'd have had opinions about today, Jake corrected. He'd have liked some of it. He'd have had notes on the rest. He always had notes. He always had notes, Jake agreed. 0800, Emily. Go be exactly who you are in that room. Don't let them make you smaller than you are. She put the radio away. She thought about Walker for a moment longer than she usually let herself. Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Walker, who had retired 4 years ago and was now, as far as she knew, living in a house in coastal Georgia with a dock and a small boat and an opinion about everything that he dispensed with the same precision he had once dispensed tactical instruction. She had talked to him 6 months ago. He had asked about Jake, about the team, about whether she was still doing the things she had always done, which was carrying too much of other people's weight in addition to her own. She had told him she was working on it. He had told her that people who said they were working on it were generally not working on it. She had changed the subject. She thought, now that he had known something like this was coming. Not specifically, he could not have known the valley or the mission or the 7 positions. But he had known, in the way that experienced people know things, that someone with Emily Carter's specific combination of skills and judgment and stubborn ethical core was going to end up, at some point, in a room where the official version of events and the true version of events were not the same thing, and where the choice between them was not actually a choice. He had been preparing her for this room for 11 years. She hoped she had paid sufficient attention. At 0600, she went and found the communications terminal again. She sent one more message through the secondary network, not to Jake, not to her counterintelligence contact, but to a retired gunnery sergeant in coastal Georgia. It was 4 words. The time came ready. The response arrived 11 minutes later. Knew it would. Go. She put the terminal away and went to prepare for the debrief. The formal debrief room at the forward operating base was larger than the communications center where she had met Marsh the previous afternoon. There were 8 people in it when Emily arrived at 0758. She was 2 minutes early, which she had decided on deliberately early enough to show respect for the process, not so early that it looked like anxiety. She recognized 4 of the 8, Marsh at the head of the table. Lieutenant Morales, who had relayed the orders, and who looked like he had not slept. A JAG officer she had been briefed was named Captain Chen, who was there in a legal capacity. And the civilian with the gray temples from the previous day's conversation, who apparently had more involvement in this process than a preliminary conversation warranted. The other four she did not recognize. Two in uniform, a major whose insignia identified her as intelligence. A colonel Emily did not know. Two more civilians, younger than gray temples, with the specific attentiveness of people who were there to observe and record rather than to participate. Everyone was already seated. Emily sat in the chair that had been left open across from Marsh. She put her hands on the table, open and still. Marsh looked at the clock. 07:59. We'll begin at 0800, he said to the room. 1 minute of silence. The kind of silence that is not comfortable but is not hostile either. It is the silence of a room full of people who understand the weight of the proceeding they are about to conduct and are organizing themselves accordingly. At 0800 exactly, Marsh said, "This is the formal after-action debrief for Operation Corridor Watch." Dated, he gave the date and time for the record conducted at the forward operating base. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter, Marine Scout Sniper, is the primary subject of this debrief. Captain Chen is present as legal representative. All statements made in this proceeding are on the record. He paused. Staff Sergeant Carter, do you understand your rights and the nature of this proceeding? Yes, sir, Emily said. You may begin with your account of events. Chronological, from the beginning of your observation posting. She began. She had rehearsed this. Not the way an actor rehearses, she was not creating a performance. She had rehearsed the way a surgeon rehearses a procedure, going through the sequence mentally to ensure that nothing was left out, that the order was correct, that the language was precise and consistent with the written account in her jacket pocket. She spoke for 22 minutes without interruption. She gave them the observation timeline, the positions, the 7-position network, and the analysis of its design, the calculations she had made about the SEAL element's approach, the communications with command, the order to hold, the decision, the sequence of shots, Jake's wound, the counter-snipper, the 8th shot, Harris's confirmation that the corridor was clear. She spoke in the flat, precise voice she used for operational reporting, not because she was hiding emotion, but because in this room, emotion was not the tool. Precision was the tool. Completeness was the tool. When she finished, Marsh said, "Thank you." Questions for the record. The intelligence major went first. Her name was Major Reeves, and she had the quality of someone who did not waste words, because she understood that every word you used was a word you had to stand behind. Staff Sergeant, when you made the decision to engage without authorization, were you aware that command had been informed of your assessment and had explicitly ordered you to hold? Yes, ma'am, and you proceeded anyway. Yes, ma'am. Walk me through the specific moment of that decision, not the analysis leading up to it, the moment itself. Emily paused, not because she didn't know the answer, but because this question deserved more than the rehearsed version. It deserved the true one. The specific moment, she said, was when I calculated that the SEAL element had 22 minutes before entering the kill zone, and that the minimum time required for command to evaluate my assessment, reverse the hold order, and communicate that reversal back to me and to the element was 40 to 50 minutes under best conditions. She paused. I did the math, and then I made the decision. Just the math, Reeves said. It was not quite a question. The math and 11 years of field experience that informed the math, Emily said. You can't fully separate them. Reeves made a note. The Colonel Emily didn't know went next. Staff Sergeant Carter, have you operated without direct authorization before this incident? No, sir. In 11 years, this is the first time. Yes, sir. What made this situation different from other situations where you may have believed authorization was too slow or command's assessment was incomplete? Emily looked at him directly. In other situations, the cost of waiting was acceptable. In this situation, it was not. Who determined that? I did, sir. Based on your individual judgment. Yes, sir. Based on my individual judgment, 11 years of field experience, and 72 hours of direct observation that no one else in the command chain had. The colonel wrote something. Emily could not see what it was. She did not try to. Gray Temples was silent through the first round of questions. When he spoke, his voice had the same quality it had carried in the preliminary meeting, technically precise in a way that communicated specific expertise. Staff Sergeant, I want to return to the counter-sniper position. In your account, you identified it after the 7th primary target had been engaged. Is that accurate? That's accurate. I identified the probability of a counter position earlier, but the specific location was not confirmed until after the seventh shot. You identified the probability at what point in your observation? Hour 40 of the 72-hour observation, when I recognized that the seven-position network had no obvious gaps. So you spent 32 hours knowing a counter position was probable and not knowing where it was. Yes. Did that change your decision matrix about engaging the primary positions? She thought about this. It was a precise question asked with genuine intelligence. Yes, she said, it was a factor. I knew that engaging the primary positions would expose my location to a degree muzzle signature, sound pattern. The simple fact that someone who was specifically positioned to respond to an interdiction element would understand what was happening and begin looking for me. The counter position being unconfirmed added risk to the operation. But you proceeded. The math still worked, Emily said. The counter position was a risk to me and to my spotter. The seven-position network was a certainty to 12 people. Gray Temples looked at her for a moment. The math still worked, he repeated. He said it in a way that was not mocking and not dismissive. He said it the way someone repeats something when they want to hear it again, because the first time wasn't enough. Marsh spoke for the first time since opening the debrief. Staff Sergeant Carter, I want to ask you about the preparation timeline. In your assessment, how long had the primary positions been established before you began your observation posting? The room changed, she felt it. Not dramatically, no one moved or spoke, but something in the collective attention of 8 people shifted. The way a room shifts when the question everyone has been building toward finally gets asked. She had known this question was coming. She had known it since the preliminary meeting. She had decided exactly how she was going to answer it, and she had made that decision not because of what it would do for her case, but because the answer was true. Based on supply evidence I could observe from my position, and on the established patterns of movement and adjustment I documented over 72 hours, I estimate the primary positions were established between 96 and 120 hours before the engagement, she said. Likely closer to 120, silence. 5 days, Mark said. Yes, sir. The extraction mission was authorized 72 hours before the engagement. Yes, sir. I'm aware of that timeline, which means the positions were established before the mission was authorized. Yes, sir. The silence in the room was now a different kind of silence. It had weight and direction. It was the silence of people absorbing a confirmed fact that some of them had already suspected, and some of them were hearing explicitly for the first time. Major Reeves said, very quietly, for the record, Staff Sergeant Carter, are you suggesting that the enemy's preparation of those positions implies advanced knowledge of the mission or the approach route? Emily looked at her. I'm stating what the timeline shows, Emily said carefully. The interpretation of what that timeline implies is above my pay grade and is a question for people with access to information I don't have. Reeves looked at her for a long moment. That's a very careful answer, she said. It's a precise answer, Emily said. Those are the same thing for me. Something moved behind Reeves's expression. Something that was close to respect, but was too disciplined to become visible enough to name. Marsh called a 10-minute recess. Emily stood. She did not walk around. She stood near her chair and drank water from the cup that had been provided. And she kept her face neutral because the room was still full of people and cameras, and this was not the time for anything that could be read as anything. Captain Chen, the JAG officer, moved to her side. He spoke quietly enough that the words stayed between them. You're doing well, he said. I'm telling the truth, Emily said. That makes it easier. It makes it cleaner, Chen corrected gently. Easier is a different thing. Some of the people in this room have a preferred version of events, and your testimony is making that version harder to maintain. Is that a problem for me or for them? Right now it's both, Chen said. But the direction it's moving is in your favor. The intelligence officers, Reeves and Colonel Nash, they came in this morning with a different posture than they have now. Something shifted in the last 20 minutes. Emily thought about the message she had sent from her secondary radio. Already looking. Don't say anything else. She thought about Walker's counterintelligence contact, who operated in a different lane and who had been given 9 words and 36 hours to do something with them. She thought about what already looking might mean in terms of what that person had found and who they had talked to, and whether any of that had made its way into the briefing materials that the intelligence officers had reviewed before walking into this room. She thought about Marsh's expression when she stated the 5-day timeline. He had not looked surprised. He had looked like a man who had just had something confirmed. The direction it's moving, she said quietly to Chen. What does that mean concretely for the investigation? Chen hesitated. Not the hesitation of someone who didn't know, but the hesitation of someone choosing how much to say. "I've received a communication this morning," he said, "from outside this proceeding. I'm not at liberty to share the source. But the communication indicates that the authorization's investigation may be superseded by a higher priority proceeding, one that changes the context of your decision significantly." Emily looked at him. "Supersede," she said. "Subsumed is perhaps more accurate. The question of whether you had authorization becomes secondary to the question of why authorization was necessary in the first place." She understood what he was telling her. Not completely, she did not have all the pieces, and she was not going to have them all today. But enough. The investigation into her decision was going to become part of the investigation into the leak. The question of whether Emily Carter had followed proper procedure was going to be answered inside the larger question of whether the proper procedure had been compromised before she ever had to make the choice. "How long before that becomes official?" she asked. "I don't know, but I think it will be before the end of this debrief." Chen looked at her steadily. "When it happens, it's going to look like a resolution in your favor. And it is, in the immediate sense. But Emily." He used her first name, which he had not done before, and the shift was deliberate. "The investigation it feeds into is not going to be quick. And the people who are the subject of that larger investigation have resources and incentives and institutional relationships that you don't have. This is not going to be simple." "Nothing worth doing is simple," Emily said. Chen looked at her for a moment. "Walker trained you," he said. It was not a question. She looked at him sharply. "You know Walker?" "I was in his program 3 years before you," Chen said. "He mentioned you, not by name, he never used names. But he described a student once who he said was the first person in 20 years of running that Nevada exercise who had identified the hidden Eastern position and then done the correct thing with that knowledge." He paused. "I've always assumed that was you." Emily stood very still. "He told me identifying it was less impressive than what I did after," she said quietly. "I know what he told you," Chen said. "He said same thing to me when I asked about it. He said the impressive part was the discipline to wait after identifying it, to keep the information and use it at the right moment instead of reacting immediately." He looked at her with an expression she recognized not from this room, not from today, but from a training building in another state years ago, from the faces of people who were young and learning something that would take years to fully understand. "Today you didn't wait," he said. "You judged that waiting was the wrong choice. And I think based on everything I've seen in this room this morning, that judgment was correct." The recess was ending. People were returning to their seats. Emily moved back to hers. She thought about Walker, about discipline and waiting and knowing when waiting was right and when it wasn't, about the questions she had asked him in his office and the answer he had never given directly. She thought she understood now what the answer was. The answer was, "You'll know when the time comes. And when the time comes, the knowing will not feel like certainty. It will feel like weight, like responsibility so complete that choosing anything else is not actually a choice at all." Marsh called the room back to order. He looked at a document that had been placed in front of him during the recess. He read it without expression. Then he looked up. "For the record," he said, "this debrief is being incorporated into an active counterintelligence investigation. The authorization question regarding Staff Sergeant Carter's engagement decision will be evaluated within the framework of that investigation, which has been assigned priority status by Regional Command. Staff Sergeant Carter, you are not a subject of the counterintelligence investigation. You are a material witness." He paused. "Do you understand the distinction?" "Yes, sir," Emily said. "Good." Marsh set the document down. "We're going to continue with the debrief, but the framework has changed. The questions you'll now receive are focused on the intelligence aspects of your observation, the preparation timeline, the countersnapper, and your assessment of operational security." He looked at her across the table. "This is going to take longer than originally scheduled. Do you need anything before we continue?" "No, sir," Emily said. She was ready. She had been ready, in one way or another, since hour 2 of the observation posting, when she first understood what she was looking at and first understood what it would cost her to act on that knowledge and decided that the cost was acceptable. The room settled in. The questions began again, sharper now, more specific, aimed at the information she carried rather than the decision she had made. And Emily Carter answered every one of them with the same precision she brought to every shot, with the same patience she had held in the rocks for 72 hours, with the same absolute clear-eyed refusal to make the truth smaller than it was in order to make her position more comfortable. Because that was who she was. It had always been who she was. And she was not, at this late stage, going to become anyone different. Outside, the day was moving toward mid-morning. Somewhere across the flight distance, Jake Reynolds was in a hospital bed with a clear head and 6 weeks of recovery ahead of him. Somewhere in coastal Georgia, a retired gunnery sergeant was on a dock with a coffee and a certainty he had never expressed directly, but had communicated completely over 23 years of instruction. Somewhere in this building, in a room she would never see, two people with gray temples and the specific attentiveness of counterintelligence professionals were working through a different set of questions that would eventually, in their own time and in their own way, arrive at the same truth that Emily had been sitting on for the last 18 hours. The truth that a valley had been prepared for an operation 5 days before the operation was authorized. The truth that someone had known. The truth that 12 people were alive because one person had been in position long enough to see what everyone else had missed. The debrief ran 4 more hours. When it was done, Emily Carter walked out of the room, into the flat afternoon light, and stood very still for a moment. The exhaustion hit her then. The full weight of 4 days, the observation, the engagement, the counter-snapper, Jake's wound, Marcia's room, the night of writing, the debrief landed on her at once. The way accumulated things do when the thing that has been holding them back finally stops. She breathed through it. She let it exist without fighting it. Then she took out her secondary radio and sent a message to Jake. Done. Material witness, not subject. Counterintelligence has priority. You were right about the second option. His response came in 3 minutes. I know. The surgeon told me about 20 minutes ago. Apparently someone came to speak with him about the timeline of my wound and the position it indicated. They're already working the problem from multiple angles. Are you okay? My shoulder is a disaster, and I'm in a hospital bed in a country where it is currently extremely cold, and I have been awake for too long. Other than that, I'm fine. Sleep first, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she wrote, 32 minutes ago, a JAG officer told me he was in Walker's program 3 years before me. He knew about the Nevada exercise. A longer pause this time. Then Jake wrote, Walker built a long chain. He did, Emily agreed. Emily, today, everything today, he would say you did the right things. Not just the shooting, all of it. The writing, the contact, the room, the way you answered every question. She sat with that for a moment. She did not feel like a person who had done the right things. She felt like a person who had done the only available things and was now living inside the consequences of that, which was a different experience entirely. It was not the clean feeling that doing the right thing is sometimes described as producing. It was heavier than that, more complicated than that, more real. But it was solid. It was real and it was solid. And it did not shift underneath her when she put weight on it, which was, she had come to understand the actual definition of right. Not the feeling, the solidity, the thing that holds. Get some sleep, she wrote to Jake. You too, he said back. She put the radio away. She would sleep soon. But first, she needed to eat something real and drink water and send one more message to one more person, a short message, carefully worded. That would move one piece of the larger puzzle one step closer to the people who needed to find it. Walker had built a long chain. She was one link in it. Today she had learned there were more links than she had known about. She was grateful for that. She was going to need all of them. She walked back into the building, found the communications terminal, and began to type. The message she sent that evening from the communications terminal took her 40 minutes to write. Not because she did not know what to say. She knew exactly what to say. The 40 minutes was the time it took to say it with the precision it required, every word chosen, every implication considered, every fact stated in a way that was defensible and complete and could not be misread by the person receiving it or misrepresented by anyone who might eventually see it in a different context. When it was done, she sent it to the counterintelligence contact, the person who had responded with 6 words, the person who had been in Walker's chain before Emily knew there was a chain. Then she went and slept for 7 hours. She woke up knowing something had shifted. She could not have explained it precisely. It was the same instinct that had identified the shadow 14 meters east of a cracked boulder, the same professional sense that read the shape of a situation before the details were fully visible. Something in the larger structure of the problem had moved overnight. She found out what it was at 0700 when Marsh himself came to the operations building. Luke, not a message, not a relay through Morales. Marsh, personally, walking into the room where she was sitting with coffee and her notepad, looking like a man who had been awake for the same 7 hours she had been asleep. He sat across from her without ceremony. Last night, he said, counterintelligence executed 3 simultaneous actions at separate locations. I can't give you details. What I can tell you is that those actions were directly connected to the intelligence failure that allowed the valley to be prepared 5 days before your mission. He paused. The information that enabled those actions came through a channel that traces back to your observation documentation and a communication you sent 48 hours ago. Emily said nothing. You started something, Marsh said, in the valley, and then you kept starting it in the right rooms, at the right times, with the right information. The documentation you wrote before the debrief, the contact you reached out to, the precision of your testimony. He looked at her steadily. I want to be honest with you. When I walked into the preliminary meeting 2 days ago, I was not certain whose side of this you were on. I'm on the side of the 12 people who walked out of that valley, Emily said. Marsh looked at her for a long moment. I know that now, he said. He told her the rest in careful, measured pieces. The counterintelligence investigation had identified 2 individuals within the regional planning apparatus who had access to both the extraction mission details and the approach route designation. The valley had not been randomly selected as a trap location. It had been specifically identified and communicated to enemy forces because someone with access to operational planning had provided that specific information. The 5-day preparation timeline was not an anomaly. It was evidence. Evidence that Emily had been the first person to identify from a rock in the mountains because she had been lying still long enough to read it. The authorization investigation, Emily said, is closed, Marsh said. Formally closed as of 0600 this morning. The finding is that your decision to engage was made under circumstances that were fundamentally altered by the intelligence compromise. You were operating on incomplete information about why command was hesitant to authorize information that was unavailable to you because it was classified above your clearance level. He paused. You also happen to be correct. Both things are in the record. Emily sat with that for a moment. She had expected to feel relief. She felt something, but it was quieter than relief and more complicated. It was the feeling of a weight being set down that you had carried so long you had forgotten the carrying was optional. Jake, she said, has already been briefed. Captain Chen went to the hospital at 0630. How did he take it? Marsh almost smiled. Your spotter told Chen, and I am quoting directly from the report here, that the finding was the correct one and that anyone who had read the documentation carefully would have reached it faster and that he hoped whoever ran. The debrief was taking notes for future reference. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. That sounds right, she said. He also said he wants to speak with you directly before any public communication goes out. There's going to be public communication? No, Marsh said. There is not. None of this becomes public. The counterintelligence investigation is classified. The details of the Valley engagement are classified. Your name, your decision, the 8 shots, none of it appears in any document that leaves the cleared community. He looked at her with an expression that she read as something between apology and honesty. You understand what that means. She understood. It meant the 12 people who had walked out of that valley would never know her name. It meant there would be no ceremony, no public recognition, no story told outside the rooms where clearances were required. It meant that the decision she had made, the one that had cost her sleep and certainty, and the straightforward version of her career, would exist in the classified record and nowhere else. She had known this was the likely outcome since the moment she decided to act. She had made her peace with it on the mountainside. In the 4 minutes, she had allowed herself to sit on the ground after the helicopter left with Jake. I understand, she said. Marsh studied her face. You're not surprised? No, sir. Most people would have a stronger reaction. The outcome I was working toward was not recognition, Emily said. It was the correct answer to the intelligence problem and the protection of the people in that valley. Both of those things have happened. She met his eyes. Marsh was quiet. Then he said, Walker trained you. It was the second time in 2 days someone had said that to her. She was beginning to understand that Walker's name in this context was not casual. It was a specific form of communication between people who understood what the name meant. Yes, sir, she said. He was my instructor, Marsh said. 26 years ago. I was not his best student. He said this without self-pity, with the flat honesty of someone who had made peace with an accurate assessment of themselves. But I learned something from him that I have not forgotten. He said the measure of a person in this work was not what they did when the path was clear. It was what they did when the path disappeared, and they had to decide whether to stand still or walk forward into the dark. Emily did not say anything. She did not need to. You walked forward, Marsh said. In multiple rooms. In multiple ways he stood. The formal notation in your file will reflect outstanding performance under exceptional circumstances. Recommendation for commendation has been submitted. Whether it goes anywhere above my level is above my level. But it's submitted. He extended his hand. He stood and shook it. This handshake was different from the one with Harris. It lasted a second longer. It had a different weight, not the weight of operational acknowledgement, but something more personal. The weight of one person communicating to another that they have seen something real. What happens now? You take 2 weeks. Full stand down. Then you return to your unit and you go back to work. He picked up his cover from the table. The counterintelligence investigation will require your testimony at intervals. Chen will coordinate the scheduling. Other than that, you go back to being Staff Sergeant Emily Carter, Marine Scout sniper, with an unremarkable classified record and an excellent fitness report. Unremarkable, she said. Classified, he corrected, which in this business is the highest category of remarkable there is. He moved toward the door. Then he stopped, the same way he had stopped her, at the door of the communications center 2 days ago. The same deliberate pause. One more thing. The SEAL Element Commander Harris submitted a formal unit commendation on behalf of his team. It's classified, it goes in the file, it never goes public. But every member of that team signed it. He paused. All 12 of them. He left. Emily stood in the operations building for a moment after the door closed. 12 signatures. She thought about Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb. 3 steps. A real measurement. Harris had been precise about that, not an approximation, not a figure of speech. 3 actual steps between where Webb had been standing and where the counter-snipper's line of fire had crossed. She thought about all 12 of them, and the fact that none of them knew her name, and none of them ever would, and all 12 of them had signed a document anyway, because Harris had told them someone deserved to be thanked, even if that person could never be told directly. That was something. That was, she thought, actually everything. She picked up her radio and called Jake. He answered on the first transmission. Marsh came to see you, he said. It was not a question. How did you know? Because Chen was at my bedside at 6:30 in the morning, which means something had already happened, and the something was significant enough that it couldn't wait for a normal hour. And you are the kind of person Marsh delivers news to personally when the news is important. A pause. Also, I know you. You would have messaged me the moment you woke up if nothing had happened. The fact that you waited means something happened that you needed to sit with first. 4 years together, he knew her. The investigation is closed, she said. The silence on his end lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. Good, he said finally. His voice was different, not dramatically, but in the specific way that voices change when something that has been held against them is released. That's the right outcome, it is. And the other thing? The larger investigation? Moving, she said. I don't have details, but moving in the right direction because of the documentation. Because of everything, Emily said. The documentation, the contact, the testimony, the preparation timeline, all of it together. She paused. Because Walker built a chain long enough to reach every room that needed to be reached. Jake was quiet for a moment. Have you talked to him? He asked. Not directly. I sent him 4 words the morning of the debrief. 2 words, Emily said. Go. That's all. Jake made a sound that was close to a laugh. That's Walker. That's Walker, she agreed, a longer silence. The comfortable kind. The kind that 2 people only achieve after enough time together. That silence is not an absence of communication, but a form of it. Emily, Jake said. Yeah. I've been lying here for 2 days thinking about the valley, not the engagement. The part before, the 72 hours. His voice was careful in the way it got when he was saying something he had organized. You were out there for 3 days, in the cold, on almost no sleep, with a mission that was officially about observation only, and you built a complete picture of something that nobody else had identified, and that every level of command above us had missed. And then you made the hardest call I have ever personally witnessed anyone make. He paused. I want you to know that I have never been more certain of anyone's judgment than I was of yours in that valley. Not once, not for 1 second. She felt the thing in her throat again. The same thing she had felt when Harris told her about 3 steps. She managed it with the same tools she used for everything. Breath, steadiness. The choice to keep the important things internal where they belong. You told me I wasn't going to miss, she said. You weren't going to miss, Jake said immediately. That was not encouragement. That was assessment. I know. I need you to know that I know the difference, he said, between saying something to help someone and saying something because it's true. With you, in that moment, it was true. I've never said it when it wasn't. She believed him. She had always believed him. That was the thing about Jake Reynolds. He did not offer comfort when comfort was not accurate. He offered truth in the form that was most useful, which sometimes looked like comfort, and sometimes looked like a hard push, and sometimes looked like silence. But it was always truth underneath. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks, he confirmed. When you're cleared for field work, we're going to Nevada. We're going to Nevada, he agreed. And I want to see that position Walker denied for 3 weeks. I want to understand what it looked like from your angle. It looked like a shadow that shouldn't be there, Emily said. It always does, Jake said quietly. With you, it always does. She flew back to the main base that afternoon. 14 days of stand down, which she spent partly sleeping, partly running, partly sitting with the written account which she had made in the operations building and reading it through with the specific attention of someone trying to understand their own decision-making, not to justify it, but to learn from it. She found things she would do differently. Not the decision, she would not change the decision, but the sequence, the speed, the specific words she had used in the communication to Harris when she told him to move his people away from the northern windows. She would be faster. She would be more precise. She would trust the instinct even earlier, cut the deliberation shorter, act on the pattern before it was fully resolved. Because the pattern was clear enough and the cost of waiting for complete resolution was too high. She was not done learning. She was never going to be done learning. She had come to understand the whole point. The moment you believed you had finished learning was the moment you became the thing you were most afraid of, the overconfident shooter who knew how to fire, but had forgotten how to see. On day 11 of the stand down, she called Walker. She had been putting it off, not because she didn't want to talk to him. She always wanted to talk to him, but because she did not yet know exactly what she wanted to say. And she did not want to have the conversation until she did. On day 11, she knew. He picked up on the third ring. His voice was the same, as it always was, a little slower than it used to be. Not because age had diminished it, but because he had stopped moving at the pace that urgency required and had settled into the pace that clarity allowed. He sounded like a man who had made peace with time. Emily, he said, how are you? She asked. Good enough. The dock needs work. The boat is arguing with me. Other than that, fine. A pause. How's Jake? 6 weeks recovery. Full function after, they say. Good. He's good, people. Another pause, longer, with a quality to it that told her he was deciding something. You've had a week. I've had a week, she confirmed. The kind that changes things. Yes. Does it need to change things? He asked it as a genuine question, not a leading one. Walker's questions were always genuine. Or did it show you something about who you already were? She sat with that, the doc question. He had always done this, not told her what to think, but asked the question that led her to think it herself. She had found it frustrating at 24. At 35, she understood it as the most respectful form of instruction that existed. It showed me, she said finally. I think I already knew most of it. I just hadn't been tested on it in exactly that way. In what way exactly? The way where the cost was so high and the path was so clear, and the two things were completely incompatible with each other, and I had to choose between them in real time without the option to think about it later. And you chose, and the cost? Was acceptable, she said. Is acceptable again. I know you would, Walker said. I've always known you would. That's not the question I've been waiting to hear you answer. Another pause. The question is whether you understand why. She thought about 12 signatures on a classified document. About 3 steps. About Jake's voice saying, you weren't going to miss, and meaning it as assessment, not encouragement. About Marsh's face when he said you walked forward. About Chen in the debrief recess, confirming that the Nevada exercise story had been Walker's way of passing something forward through time. Because the mission is the people, she said. It was what Jake had told her. What Walker had told Jake. What Walker had told a generation of students before Jake, and before Emily, and before Chen, and probably before Marsh, in one form or another. The same truth passed forward through different voices across years and deployments in difficult rooms and mountain valleys. The mission is not just the objective. The mission is the people who trust you. Walker was quiet on the other end of the line. Then he said, yes, that's it. That's the whole thing. Something settled in Emily's chest. Something that had been sitting at a slight angle for 11 days. Not wrong, not painful, but not quite level, settled, flat and even and right. I should have called sooner, she said. You called when you knew what you wanted to say, Walker said. That's always the right time. She could hear the Georgia coast in the background of the call. The wind, the water, the specific quietness of a place that had been chosen for its distance from urgency. He had earned that distance. He had spent 23 years building the chain and training the people in it and asking the questions that needed to be asked, and now he sat on a dock and let the chain do what chains do. Hold, the network you built, Emily said. The counterintelligence contact. Marsh even. They all trace back to you. People trace back to themselves, Walker said. I just gave them the right questions. What they did with the questions, that's them. You're deflecting. I'm being accurate. But there was something in his voice, warmth maybe, or the closest thing to pride that someone like Walker allowed himself. I knew one day someone was going to need the whole chain to pull at once. I just didn't know it would be you. Why not me, she asked. Because you were always the one I thought would need it least, he said. You were always the one I thought had all the answers already. A pause. I was wrong about that. I didn't have the answers. No, you had something better. You had the right questions. And you knew how to stay still long enough to let the answers find you. His voice shifted slightly. How do you feel, Emily? Not operationally. How do you feel? She thought about it honestly. The real answer, not the clean one. Tired, she said. Grateful. Certain in a way I wasn't before. And a little bit lonely, which I know sounds strange. It doesn't sound strange, Walker said immediately. It sounds exactly right. The things we carry in classified records, they're real things. They happen. They change people's lives. And we carry them alone because we have to. And that aloneness is the price of the work. And most days it's a price worth paying. And some days it's heavier than others. Today it's heavier, she said. Then carry it today and let tomorrow be lighter, Walker said. That's the only way through. She thought about Jake in his hospital bed, choosing the clear head over the pain management, because she needed his brain sharp, and he knew she needed it, and he did it without being asked. She thought about Harris and his 12 signatures. She thought about Chen in the recess, confirming that the chain was longer than she knew. She thought about Marsh at the door, pausing to tell her about the hold personally. She was not, she realized, carrying it entirely alone. That was the thing Walker had built. Not just a chain that could pull when pulling was needed. A web of people who understood that the work was too heavy for any one person, and who had agreed, implicitly, through the simple act of being who they were, to share the weight. She was part of that web. She had always been part of it. She just hadn't needed to feel the whole thing before today. Thank you, she said, for all of it. The training and the questions and the Nevada exercise and the chain and all of it. Do good work, Walker said. That's all the thanks I want. I will, I know you will. A pause. Go rest, Emily. You've earned it. She put the phone down. She sat for a moment in the specific quiet that exists after an important conversation, not empty quiet, not peaceful exactly, but full in the way that a room is full after someone significant has just left it, charged with the shape of what was said. 2 weeks later, she returned to her unit. She went back to work. She went back to the observation, the analysis, the patience, the judgment calls made in real time with imperfect information and high stakes. She went back to the life she had built over 11 years, the life inside the discipline, inside the skill, inside the specific form of responsibility that lived at the intersection of what she was capable of and what was required of her. And she carried the valley with her, not as a weight, not as a wound, as a reference point. The thing she had come to know was true about herself in a way that could not be undone or questioned or renegotiated. She carried Jake's 6 weeks of recovery and his return to full function, and the day they drove out to Nevada and stood in the terrain where the hidden eastern position had been built, and she showed him what the angle had looked like. And he was silent for a long time, and then he said, I see it. I see exactly what you saw. She carried the 12 signatures she would never read but knew existed. She carried 3 steps as a number that was not abstract but real, measured, walked out on the ground by a man who understood the difference between almost and not quite. She carried Walker's voice go in the moment she needed it most. And she carried the absolute, unshakable knowledge of what she had learned in a valley in eastern Afghanistan, over 72 hours on a mountainside with the wind in her face and everything at stake, that the mission was not the objective. The mission was the people. And as long as she understood that, as long as she carried it and lived it, and let it be the thing that decided every hard choice when hard choices came again, as they always came again, she would never lose the thing that mattered most. Not the shot, the reason for it. That was Emily Carter's truth. Not the legend, not the classified file, not the commendation sitting in a folder above her clearance level. The truth that lived inside her, in the same place where skill lived, where judgment lived, where the knowledge of when to wait and when to act had taken 11 years to build and 1 valley to confirm. That truth had saved 12 lives, and it would save more. Because Staff Sergeant Emily Carter was not finished. She was, in fact, just beginning to understand what she was capable of. And the people who trusted her with their lives would never have reason to doubt that they were safe in that trust. Not for a single step, not even one.